They told me my father left me nothing. But 3 weeks after his funeral, a man knocked on my door and said, "He didn't leave you nothing, he left you something dangerous." And in that moment, I realized my father's death wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Welcome back to Inspired Real Events, where ordinary people meet impossible family and the quiet ones learn the loudest lessons. If betrayal, gratitude, and slow burn justice are your thing, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what kind of relationship I had with my father, I would have smiled and said, complicated. If you asked me today, I'd probably laugh. Not because it's funny, because sometimes laughter is the only thing standing between a woman and tears. Growing up, my dad was my hero. He smelled like sawdust and coffee. Every Saturday morning, he'd make pancakes shaped like animals. Most of them looked absolutely ridiculous. One time he tried making a horse. It looked like a potato with legs. I laughed so hard milk came out of my nose. Dad laughed harder than I did. Those memories stayed with me long after everything else changed. When I was 12, my parents divorced. No screaming, no dramatic scenes, just one quiet afternoon when Mom sat me down at our kitchen table and told me Dad wouldn't be living with us anymore. I remember staring at the salt shaker. I thought if I didn't look at her, maybe the words wouldn't be real. But they were. 3 months later, Dad introduced me to Sandra, his new girlfriend. 6 months after that, she moved in. 1 year later, they were married. And just like that, my life split into before and after. At first, Dad tried. He really did. Weekend visits, birthday calls, Christmas presents. But slowly, almost without noticing, I began slipping lower on his list of priorities. Sandra had 2 children, Jason and Lily. Dad called them his bonus kids. Soon he was attending Jason's baseball games, helping Lily with school projects, taking family vacations. In every photograph posted online, they looked perfect. Meanwhile, I was becoming a guest in my own father's life. One summer, I called him 17 times. 17. He returned one call 3 weeks later. "Sorry, sweetheart, things have been busy." Busy, that word became a wall between us. Busy, too busy for lunch, too busy for birthdays, too busy to notice his daughter was quietly breaking. Still, I kept trying, because children are stubborn when it comes to loving their parents, even when they probably shouldn't be. Years passed. I graduated college. Dad missed graduation, work emergency. I got engaged. Dad came to the engagement party, spent most of it talking about Jason's promotion. At my wedding, he arrived 30 minutes late. During the father-daughter dance, his phone rang. He answered it. I wish I were joking. I genuinely wish I were. People around us pretended not to notice. But I noticed. You never forget moments like that. The funny thing is, heartbreak rarely arrives all at once. It sneaks in little by little. Tiny cracks, tiny disappointments, tiny reminders that you're no longer someone's priority. Until one day you look down and realize the entire foundation is gone. Mom always defended him. "He loves you, Emily." Maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it anymore. Then life became even stranger. At 31, I lost Mom, cancer, aggressive, cruel, fast. One day we were discussing Thanksgiving recipes. 6 months later, I was holding her hand in a hospital room. The last thing she said to me was simple, "Be happy." I promised I would. Then she closed her eyes, and the world became silent. The weeks after her funeral felt like walking underwater. Everything moved slowly. People talked. I heard sounds, but nothing felt real. Dad attended the funeral. He cried. For a moment, I thought maybe losing Mom would somehow bring us closer again. I was wrong. The very next month, he canceled dinner plans, then forgot my birthday, then vanished back into his perfect new life. At some point, I stopped chasing him. Not dramatically, not angrily. I was simply tired, exhausted. You can only knock on a closed door for so many years before your hand starts bleeding, so I built my own life. I became a graphic designer, bought a small house, adopted a ridiculous golden retriever named Waffles. Seriously, that dog had one brain cell, and it spent most of its time on vacation. But he loved me. The kind of uncomplicated love that heals broken places. Then 3 years ago, Dad died. Heart attack. Sudden, unexpected. I got the phone call at 6 in the morning. Sandra was crying. I sat on my bedroom floor for nearly an hour. not speaking, not moving, just staring at the wall. Because no matter how complicated a relationship becomes, losing a parent still hurts. The funeral was crowded. People shared stories. Everyone talked about what a generous man he had been, a devoted husband, a loving father. I remember almost laughing at that last part, not because I wanted to disrespect him, but because grief and irony sometimes arrive holding hands. After the service, Sandra barely spoke to me. Jason avoided eye contact. Lily offered a polite smile. I felt like an outsider at my own father's funeral, a guest, nothing more. 2 weeks later, the will was read. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't expecting millions. I wasn't expecting anything. Maybe a small keepsake, a watch, a photograph, a letter, something, anything. Instead, I received nothing. Absolutely nothing. Every asset went to Sandra. The house, the savings, the investments, everything. Jason and Lily each received substantial inheritances. I received a sentence. One sentence. My daughter Emily has been adequately provided for during my lifetime. That was it. I sat there stunned, not because of the money, because of what the sentence meant. It felt like being erased, as if 35 years of existence could be summarized into a legal excuse. Sandra wouldn't even look at me, neither would the attorney. I walked out, got into my car, and cried harder than I had cried in years, not for the inheritance, for the rejection, for the little girl who kept waiting by the window for her father to show up, for the teenager who called 17 times, for the bride dancing with a man answering his phone, for every version of myself that had hoped things would eventually get better. They never did. A month later, I forced myself to move on. Life doesn't stop because your heart hurts. Bills still arrive. Dogs still need walking. Work deadlines still exist, so I kept going. Until one rainy Thursday evening. The knock came, 3 sharp knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. Waffles immediately lost his mind, barking, spinning, sliding across the hardwood floor like an idiot. I opened the door. A man stood there, maybe 70, gray hair, dark coat, kind eyes, the kind of eyes that have seen a lot of life. Emily Carter. Yes, he smiled nervously. I've been looking for you. I frowned. I'm sorry, have we met? No, he swallowed, but your father asked me to find you. And suddenly the world tilted beneath my feet because my father had been dead for 6 months, and somehow this stranger knew something I didn't, something that was about to change everything. Forever. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof. Waffles stood behind me, growling as if he sensed something unusual. The stranger looked nervous. Not guilty, not threatening, just nervous, like a man carrying a burden he had held for too many years. My father asked you to find me, I finally said. The words felt absurd. Dad had been gone for 6 months. Dead people don't send visitors. Dead people don't make requests. Yet here this man was, standing on my porch, looking at me like he had crossed an ocean to get there. He reached slowly into his coat pocket. For one terrifying second, every true crime documentary I'd ever watched flashed through my head. Instead, he pulled out an envelope. Old, yellowed, worn around the edges. My name was written across the front. Emily, just Emily. The handwriting hit me like a punch. Dad's, I knew it instantly. The way he looped the Y, the way he always tilted letters slightly to the right. I hadn't seen that handwriting in years. My throat tightened. Where did you get this? The man's eyes softened. He gave it to me. I stared. When? 21 years ago. My heart nearly stopped. 21 years. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than a brick. Nothing made sense. Nothing. Come inside, I whispered. We sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I drank coffee every morning. The same table where I paid bills. The same table where ordinary life happened. Tonight it felt different, like the center of a storm. The stranger introduced himself as Walter Hayes, retired accountant, 72 years old, widower, father of 3, completely ordinary except for the fact that he had just handed me a message from my dead father. I turned the envelope over. It was sealed, untouched. Waiting, my hands trembled. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside was a folded letter, just 1 page. I unfolded it. The first line stole the air from my lungs. If you're reading this, I failed. I blinked, read it again. Then again, failed. What did that mean? My eyes raced downward. Emily, if this letter reaches you, it means I never found the courage to tell you the truth myself. For that, I am sorry, more sorry than you will ever know. I swallowed hard. Walter remained silent, allowing me to read. Before you judge me, please understand that every terrible decision I made began with fear. Fear has a way of turning good people into cowards. A chill ran through me. I kept reading. Everything changed in 2005. That was the year I discovered something your mother never knew, and something I prayed you would never have to carry. My hands began shaking harder. The room felt smaller, warmer, like the walls were slowly moving inward. I continued. If Walter is delivering this letter, he already knows the truth. Trust him. He protected it for years. I looked up. Walter nodded slowly. His expression was filled with sadness, the kind that comes from carrying someone else's secret. Then I reached the final paragraph, and the words shattered everything. Emily, before I met your mother, before you were born, there was another child. I froze, my eyes locked on the sentence, refusing to move, refusing to process it. Another child, another child, another child. The words repeated endlessly inside my head. Dad had another child, a son, a daughter, alive, dead. I looked up at Walter. Tell me this isn't real. His silence answered. My stomach dropped. I felt suddenly dizzy, like standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything I thought I knew about my family was beginning to crumble. No, I stood abruptly. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. No, Waffles jumped. Walter remained calm. Emily, no, I laughed, one sharp, broken laugh. The kind people make right before tears arrive. This is insane. I paced across the kitchen, back and forth, back and forth. Dad had another child for 35 years, and nobody knew, not Mom, not me, nobody. Why would he hide this? Walter sighed heavily, because he had been waiting years for that question. Because he believed the truth destroyed lives. I stared. Whose life? Walter looked directly into my eyes. Everyone's. The answer made things worse. Not better, much worse. I sat down again, slowly. My knees felt weak. What happened? Walter took a deep breath, then began speaking, and with every sentence my understanding of my father changed. When your father was 22, he fell in love. I listened, unable to blink. Her name was Rachel. A woman, a relationship before Mom, normal enough until Walter continued. Rachel became pregnant. My chest tightened. There was an accident. The room went silent. Rain continued outside, steady, relentless. Rachel died 2 months before the baby was born. I felt my heart break for a younger version of my father, a version I had never known. A grieving young man, lost, alone, terrified. Walter continued quietly. The doctors managed to save the baby. I closed my eyes. A child survived, my half-sibling, somewhere, somehow, real. Dad had spent decades carrying that secret. But why hide it? The answer came next, and somehow it was even worse. The baby was born with serious medical complications. I listened carefully. Your father was overwhelmed. Walter's voice cracked slightly. He was 22 years old, broke, grieving, alone. I could almost picture him, young, scared, standing in a hospital hallway, his entire future collapsing around him. The state became involved. My stomach sank. Oh no, Walter nodded. The child entered foster care. I covered my mouth. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Dad lost the woman he loved, then lost his child too, and somehow he never spoke about it, not once, not ever. The silence suddenly felt tragic, not suspicious, tragic. Did he ever find the child? Walter looked away, his eyes filled with regret. The answer wasn't simple, which meant it was probably painful. Yes, my heart jumped. What? Walter nodded. He found the child years later. Every nerve in my body awakened. Where? When? Who? Questions exploded from me. Walter reached into his briefcase, slowly, carefully. He removed a photograph, then slid it across the table. I stared at it. A young woman, brown hair, green eyes, standing beside a lake, smiling. Something about her face felt familiar, terrifyingly familiar. I leaned closer, then I saw it. The eyes, Dad's eyes, exactly Dad's eyes. A shock ran through me. The photograph slipped from my fingers. No way, Walter nodded. Her name is Claire. My half-sister, a real person, not a story, not a rumor, not a mystery, a real woman, somewhere in America, breathing, living, laughing, existing. Well, I spent 35 years believing I was an only child. Tears filled my eyes, not sad tears, not happy tears, something more complicated, something impossible to name, because suddenly I wasn't alone anymore, and yet somehow I had never felt more lost. Then Walter said something that changed everything again, something that made my blood run cold, something Dad had never included in the letter, something Walter himself had only discovered after Dad's death. Claire wasn't the only secret. There was another reason Dad had hidden the truth. A reason connected to Sandra, to the inheritance, to the will, and to a missing account worth nearly $2 million. The moment those words left Walter's mouth, I realized my father's story was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. $2 million. The number hung in the air between us. Ridiculous, impossible. My father had never been wealthy. Comfortable, yes. Successful, maybe. But $2 million. That didn't sound like the man who spent years telling me to turn off lights because electricity wasn't free. It didn't sound like the man who reused old coffee cans to store nails in the garage. It didn't sound like Dad. Walter looked at me carefully. "You're wondering if I'm mistaken," I nodded. "Because I am." My voice sounded weak, distant, like someone else's. Walter reached into his briefcase again. This time he removed several folders, old financial statements, tax records, documents covered with dates and signatures, paper evidence. The kind that doesn't care whether you're emotionally prepared. He slid one toward me. I stared at the numbers, then stared again. The account balance made my stomach drop. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, millions, real money, life-changing money. The kind of money people dream about. The kind of money that starts family wars. My hands felt cold. "Where did this come from?" Walter folded his hands together. "Your father invested early in a construction company." I frowned. Dad never talked about investments. Never. He bought shares decades ago, almost forgot about them. I blinked. "What happened?" "The company exploded in value." My heart pounded. Every answer created 3 new questions. If this account existed, why wasn't it in the will? Why didn't Sandra receive it? Why didn't Jason or Lily? Most importantly, why didn't I know? Walter seemed to read my thoughts. Because the account disappeared. The room went quiet. I stared at him. Disappeared? Not legally. That answer somehow sounded worse. Walter leaned forward. His voice dropped. 3 months before your father died, he became convinced someone was moving money. A chill ran down my spine. "What are you saying?" Walter hesitated, as though choosing every word carefully. "I'm saying your father believed someone close to him was stealing." My chest tightened. Immediately one name appeared in my mind, Sandra. Then I hated myself for thinking it, because grief makes people suspicious, and suspicion isn't proof. Still, the thought remained. Walter continued. "He hired me privately." I stared. "You worked for him? For years." Everything was becoming more complicated. Every answer opened another locked door. Walter sighed heavily. "Your father asked me to investigate quietly." "Did you?" "Yes," I swallowed. "What did you find?" Walter looked toward the rain-covered window, then back at me. "I found transfers." My pulse quickened. "Transfers to whom?" His jaw tightened. "Accounts connected to Sandra." The words hit like a hammer. I sat frozen, unable to react, unable to speak, because one part of me wanted to reject it immediately. Another part remembered something, a memory, small. Insignificant, at least it had seemed insignificant at the time. A Christmas dinner years ago, Sandra laughing while showing off a diamond bracelet, Dad looking confused, actually confused when someone complimented it. At the time I assumed he was distracted. Now, I wasn't so sure. Walter continued. "Your father confronted her." My eyes widened. "What happened?" He backed down. That sounded exactly like Dad, a man who avoided conflict whenever possible. A man who spent decades running from difficult conversations. Walter rubbed his forehead. "He wanted proof before making accusations." I nodded slowly. That part made sense. Sandra might have been many things, but accusations without evidence could destroy a family. Walter opened another folder. Inside were copies of emails, bank requests, transaction records, months of investigation. Dad had been preparing something, planning something, trying to uncover the truth, and then he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, before finishing, before explaining, before fixing any of it. The realization hurt. Because for the first time in years, I could almost feel him trying to do the right thing, trying to clean up mistakes, trying to leave something behind. Too late. But trying, I stared at one document, then another, then another. The evidence wasn't complete, but it was enough to raise questions. Big questions, dangerous questions. Questions nobody wanted asked, especially not after a funeral. "Why are you showing me this now?" Walter's expression changed. Something darker entered his eyes, concern, real concern, because he hadn't come here only to share secrets. He had come here for a reason, and suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. "Emily." His voice was quiet, careful. "There is one more thing." Of course there was. Every time someone said those words, my life became more complicated. I braced myself. Walter slid a photograph across the table. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my heart nearly stopped. The photo showed Claire, my half-sister, standing beside my father. They were smiling together, like family, like people who knew each other. I grabbed the photo. My hands trembled. "When was this taken?" Walter answered softly. 4 years ago." The room spun. For years, not 40, not decades, 4 years, Dad knew her. He actually found her. He met her, spoke to her, spent time with her, while I remained completely unaware. A strange ache spread through my chest. Jealousy. Not because Claire had done anything wrong, but because Dad had shared a part of himself with her that he never shared with me. I looked closer. There was genuine happiness on his face, a smile I hadn't seen in years. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. "He found her," Walter nodded. "Yes, and never told me." Walter looked sad. "Yes." The truth landed heavily. For a few seconds I hated him, my father, not the dead version, not the grieving young man, the father who chose silence again. The father who always chose silence. I laughed softly. A broken little sound. Of course he did, because talking would have required courage. And courage had never been his strongest quality. Tears filled my eyes. I looked down, studied Claire's face, my face, not identical, but similar enough. The same eyes, the same chin, the same smile. A stranger, and yet not a stranger at all. I wondered if she knew about me, if she had ever asked about me, if she had ever imagined meeting me. Then Walter answered a question I hadn't spoken aloud. "She knew about you." I looked up sharply. "What?" Walter nodded. "Your father told her everything." The words hit harder than expected. Everything. Dad had told Claire about me, but never told me about Claire. A painful laugh escaped my lips. The irony was unbelievable. For years I thought I was the forgotten daughter. Now I discovered there had been another daughter hidden from me the entire time. Walter continued quietly. "She wanted to meet you." My breath caught. "What?" "Several times." I stared. Every emotion collided at once. Shock, hope, confusion, fear. Claire wanted to meet me. Why didn't she? Why didn't Dad arrange it? Why didn't anyone tell me? Walter's answer came immediately. "Your father kept delaying." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Delay, avoid, postpone. The story of his life. The story of our relationship. Every difficult truth placed into a box labeled later. And eventually, there was no later. Only regret. Only unfinished conversations. Only people left behind trying to assemble pieces of a broken puzzle. Then Walter reached into his briefcase one final time. This time he removed a sealed envelope. Unlike the first one, this envelope wasn't addressed by Dad. It was addressed by Claire. To me, my name was written neatly across the front. Emily Carter. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. "This arrived 3 weeks after your father's funeral," Walter said. I stared at it, unable to move, unable to breathe. "Why didn't you give it to me sooner?" Walter looked ashamed. "Because someone tried very hard to make sure it never reached you." Every muscle in my body went rigid. "What do you mean?" His expression darkened. "The day after it arrived, my office was broken into." A cold wave rushed through me. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder, sharper, more threatening. Walter swallowed. "They didn't take computers. They didn't take cash. They took only one thing." I looked down at the envelope and immediately understood. The letter, they wanted Claire's letter. The realization sent chills through my entire body. Someone knew about Claire. Someone knew about Dad's investigation. Someone knew enough to be afraid. Walter looked directly into my eyes. And what he said next made my blood run cold. "Emily, before your father died, he believed there was evidence connecting Sandra to something far bigger than stolen money." I stared, unable to blink, unable to think. "What kind of evidence?" Walter hesitated, then finally answered. "Evidence connected to a death that happened 23 years ago." The room went silent, completely silent, because suddenly this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about family secrets. Somewhere in my father's past was a death, a hidden investigation, a missing fortune, a secret daughter. And now, for reasons I couldn't understand, all of it was leading straight toward me. I looked down at Claire's unopened letter. My hands shook, because deep inside I already knew. Whatever was written inside, that envelope was going to change my life forever, and there would be no turning back. For almost a full minute, I couldn't bring myself to open Claire's letter. It sat on the kitchen table between us. Silent, ordinary, just paper, yet somehow it felt heavier than everything else Walter had shown me combined. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, my heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Walter didn't rush me, he simply waited. Finally, I reached for the envelope. My fingers trembled. The seal cracked. A strange feeling washed over me. The feeling that my life was dividing into two parts, before this moment and after. I carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, gentle, nothing like Dad's. I began reading. Dear Emily, you don't know me, at least not yet. I've started this letter 100 times, maybe more. Every version sounded wrong. How do you introduce yourself to a sister who doesn't know you exist? I suppose there isn't a perfect way, so I'll simply say this. Hello, my name is Claire, and for most of my life I wondered if you were real. The words immediately blurred. Tears filled my eyes. I blinked quickly and continued. Your father showed me pictures of you. Graduation pictures, wedding pictures, pictures with your dog, pictures where you were laughing. He talked about you constantly. You should know that. Even when he wasn't brave enough to call, even when he made mistakes. He talked about you. A lot. Sometimes I think he loved you so much that he became afraid of disappointing you. Then he disappointed you anyway. A painful laugh escaped me. That sounded exactly like Dad. So afraid of failure that he created it himself. I continued reading. I wanted to meet you years ago. Your father wanted that too. At least I think he did. But every time we got close, he found another reason to wait. Another excuse. Another delay. Life became tomorrow, then next month, then next year, and suddenly years were gone. If you're reading this now, something happened, something bad. Because your father promised, he would introduce us himself. My chest tightened. The sadness in those words felt painfully familiar. Another person waiting for Dad to stop postponing life. Another person left standing at a door that never opened. I kept reading. There is something else you need to know. The day I met your father wasn't the happiest day of my life. It was one of the scariest, because he wasn't looking for me. Not exactly. He was looking for answers. I froze. Walter noticed immediately. What is it? I continued reading. The first thing your father asked me wasn't about my childhood. It wasn't about my health. It wasn't even about my life. He asked whether anyone had ever contacted me about Rachel's accident. Rachel. The woman Dad loved before my mother, Claire's mother. The woman who died before Claire was born. A chill crawled down my spine. I continued. At the time, I thought he was grieving. Now I think he was investigating. Because your father believed Rachel's death wasn't an accident. The words seemed to jump off the page. My pulse hammered. Walter lowered his eyes, as if he already knew what came next. I read further. I know how crazy that sounds. I thought so too. But over the years, he found things that bothered him, missing records, witness statements that changed, insurance documents that disappeared, people who suddenly couldn't remember details. Your father became obsessed, not all at once. Slowly, quietly, year after year, the way water slowly cracks stone. I looked up. Walter, he nodded grimly. Your father told me some of this. Some of this, not all, which meant there was more, much more. I continued. He told me there was one person whose name kept appearing, one person connected to Rachel's final months, one person who somehow remained close to him afterward, a person who benefited from Rachel's death more than anyone else. When he told me the name, I didn't believe him. I laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded impossible. Then he showed me the evidence, and I stopped laughing. I couldn't breathe. My eyes moved to the next line and stopped, completely stopped, because the name written there wasn't Sandra, it wasn't Jason, it wasn't Lily, it wasn't anyone I expected, it was someone else, someone from much further back, someone I had known my entire life. My hands began shaking violently. The letter slipped slightly. No, Walter leaned forward. What? I stared at the name, a name I hadn't spoken in months, a name that belonged to someone buried 3 years ago. My mother, Susan Carter. The room tilted. No! The word escaped as a whisper, a frightened whisper. My vision blurred. I read the line again, then again, still the same, still impossible, still horrifying. Claire had written my mother's name, my mother, the woman who packed my lunches, the woman who stayed up all night when I had fevers, the woman who taught me kindness, the woman I loved more than anyone. No! Tears spilled instantly. Walter looked stunned. What does it say? I couldn't answer, not immediately. The words felt poisonous. Eventually, I handed him the letter. His eyes scanned the page, then widened. Oh my God. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt enormous. Impossible. How could my mother be connected? It made no sense. None, absolutely none. I stood abruptly. My chair nearly tipped over. This is wrong. My voice cracked. It has to be wrong. Walter remained calm. Maybe, I hated that word. Maybe meant uncertainty. Maybe meant possibility. Maybe meant I couldn't dismiss it. I paced across the kitchen. Every memory of Mom flashed through my mind. Her smile, her hugs, her laugh. The way she always kissed my forehead before school. There was no universe where that woman was involved in someone's death. No universe. Yet Claire's letter wasn't finished. There was more. A lot more. With trembling hands, I continued reading. Emily, before you panic, please keep reading. Your father never believed your mother hurt Rachel, not directly. In fact, he spent years trying to prove the opposite. He believed your mother knew something she never told him, something she carried for decades. I stopped breathing. The room became completely silent. Walter's eyes met mine. Neither of us spoke. Because suddenly the story looked very different. Mom wasn't the suspect. Mom was a witness, or maybe a victim herself. I continued. 3 months before your mother died, she called me. She had never contacted me before, not once. I was shocked. She sounded frightened, not guilty, frightened. She told me she wanted to tell me the truth, the entire truth. She said she was tired of carrying it, tired of protecting people, tired of pretending. My heart pounded. Mom called Claire 3 months before cancer took her. How, why had she never told me? The questions multiplied faster than answers. I kept reading. We arranged to meet. A small diner outside Cleveland. She never arrived. A cold wave swept through me. I read the sentence again. She never arrived. Never. What happened? The next lines answered, and somehow made everything worse. The morning of our meeting, your mother called. She was crying. I've never heard anyone sound so terrified. She told me not to come. She said she had made a mistake. She said some secrets were dangerous. Then she hung up. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. Kitchen suddenly felt freezing. Every hair on my arm stood up because I remembered something. A memory buried for years. 3 months before Mom's diagnosis. 3 months before everything changed, I had visited her unexpectedly. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Crying, not ordinary crying, not sadness, fear, real fear. I remembered asking what was wrong. She smiled immediately, wiped her eyes, claimed she had watched a sad movie. At the time, I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. Walter looked troubled. What are you thinking? I swallowed hard. I think she was hiding something. The words hurt. Not because I doubted Mom, because I trusted her completely. And realizing someone you love kept secrets feels like losing them all over again. Then I reached the final page of Claire's letter, the final paragraphs, the words that changed everything once again. Emily, your father was close to finding answers before he died. Very close. He told me he had finally located a missing witness. Someone who saw what happened the night Rachel died. Someone who disappeared shortly afterward. Your father planned to meet that witness on the day before his heart attack. But the meeting never happened. The witness vanished again. And 3 weeks later, your father was dead. Maybe that's a coincidence. I hope it is. I truly hope it is. But if it isn't, please be careful. Because whoever spent 23 years protecting this secret may not want it uncovered now. And according to your father, the final piece of evidence was hidden somewhere nobody would ever think to look. Inside the old lake house. I stopped reading. Walter stared. The lake house? I nodded slowly. The lake house, my father's old vacation property, a place nobody had visited in years, a place scheduled to be sold after his death, a place filled with forgotten furniture, dust, memories, and apparently, secrets. Then my phone suddenly rang. The sound made both of us jump. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. Normally I would ignore it. This time I answered. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Slow breathing. A stranger's breathing. My stomach tightened. Hello. A man's voice finally spoke. Cold, calm, terrifyingly calm. Stop looking. Every muscle in my body locked. The voice continued. You have no idea what you're finding. Click. The line went dead. For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Walter's face had gone completely pale because he had heard it too. And suddenly the secrets buried for 23 years no longer felt like old history. Someone was watching, someone knew, and someone was afraid of what we might discover at the lake house. For several seconds after the call ended, the only sound in my kitchen was the rain. Drip, drip, drip. My phone remained frozen in my hand. The screen had already gone dark, but I was still staring at it, still hearing that voice, cold, calm, certain. Stop looking. A shiver ran through me. Walter looked almost as shaken as I felt. Did you recognize him? I slowly shook my head. No. The answer came out as barely more than a whisper, because I didn't recognize the voice. But somehow that made it worse. Unknown dangers are always scarier than known ones. Walter stood and walked toward the window, checking outside. The street was empty, only rain and darkness, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Yet neither of us felt safe anymore. Not after that phone call, not after everything we discovered. My eyes drifted back to Claire's letter, the lake house, the final piece of evidence, the place Dad apparently believed nobody would search. I swallowed hard. "We need to go." Walter turned around. "Tonight?" "Yes," his eyebrows lifted. "Emily, it's nearly midnight." "I know." The words came faster now, more determined. "If someone knows we're looking." "Waiting until tomorrow is a terrible idea." Walter stared at me for several moments, then nodded, because he knew I was right. If there really was evidence hidden there, every hour mattered, maybe every minute. An hour later, we were driving through rain. The windshield wipers worked furiously. The road ahead looked like a tunnel of darkness. I hadn't visited the lake house in almost 7 years. Dad used to take me there every summer when I was little. Some of my happiest childhood memories lived there: fishing off the dock, burnt marshmallows, board games during thunderstorms. For a brief moment, I smiled. I remembered Dad trying to teach me fishing. After 3 hours, I had caught exactly one thing. His hat, the memory escaped before I could stop it. A small laugh, a real laugh, the first one in days. Walter noticed. "What?" I shook my head. "Nothing." But inside, the memory lingered. A reminder that people aren't only their mistakes. Dad had hurt me, deeply, yet there had been good moments too, moments worth remembering. Lake House appeared shortly after 1 a.m. old. Weathered, silent, standing beside the dark water like a forgotten memory. The porch light no longer worked. The windows reflected nothing. For a moment I simply sat there, looking at it, remembering. Then I opened the car door. Cold air hit immediately. The lake smelled exactly the same. The scent transported me back 20 years, back before divorce, before secrets, before grief, back when life seemed simple. I almost cried, not from sadness. From nostalgia, because sometimes memories hurt more than losses. We entered using the spare key Dad always kept hidden beneath a decorative stone. I laughed softly when it was still there. Typical Dad, 30 years of using the same hiding place. Inside, dust covered everything. Furniture sat untouched. A grandfather clock stood frozen at 8:17. The air smelled old, forgot. The house felt like a time capsule. Walter switched on a flashlight. The beam cut through darkness. "We should split up." I immediately shook my head. "No," after threatening phone calls. "Absolutely not," Walter smiled. "Fair point." So we searched together. Bedroom first. Nothing, closets, nothing, kitchen, nothing, attic, nothing except enough spiders to start their own government. 2 hours passed, then 3. The excitement faded, frustration replaced it. Maybe the evidence was gone, maybe someone found it first, maybe Claire's information was outdated, maybe Emily. Walter's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned. He was standing in the living room near the fireplace, looking confused. "What?" He pointed toward the mantel. A row of framed photographs sat there. Family pictures, vacation pictures, childhood pictures, ordinary memories. Then I noticed something. One frame looked newer, much newer. Unlike the others, it wasn't covered in dust. I approached slowly. The photo showed Dad standing beside the lake. Alone, smiling, nothing unusual except for the frame itself. I picked it up. It felt strangely heavy, very heavy. My heart immediately accelerated. Walter saw it too. Carefully, I turned the frame over. There was tape along the back, fresh tape. Not old, fresh. Someone had opened it relatively recently. With trembling fingers, I removed the backing. A folded piece of paper slid out. Then another, and finally, a small silver key. Walter inhaled sharply. My pulse exploded, because hidden behind a simple photograph was something Dad wanted found, something important. I unfolded the first page. Dad's handwriting, immediately recognizable, immediately emotional. I read aloud. "If you found this, then either I'm dead or finally brave." A painful smile crossed my face. Even now, even after everything, that sounded exactly like him. I continued reading. "Emily, I'm sorry. I know those words are late, far too late, but they are true. If you're reading this, then I failed to fix things while I was alive. That failure belongs to me, not you, never you." My vision blurred. Tears formed instantly. I continued. "There are things I should have told you years ago about Claire, about Rachel, about your mother, most of all about why I made the choices I made. I spent decades trying to protect people. The problem is that protecting secrets and protecting people are not the same thing. I learned that too late. The words hit hard because they were true. Dad spent his life hiding things, convincing himself it was kindness, convincing himself it was protection. Maybe it started that way. Maybe. But eventually secrecy becomes its own prison. I turned the page. The next paragraph made my heart stop. The key opens a safety deposit box. Inside is evidence, not theories, not suspicions, evidence. I promised your mother I would never reveal it. Then she died. And I realized keeping promises to the dead was hurting the living. I looked up. Walter's face had gone pale again. Evidence. Real evidence. Not speculation, not rumors. Evidence. My hands shook as I continued. Emily, there is one thing you must understand. Your mother was never guilty. Never. She spent 23 years carrying someone else's sin. 23 years paying for a mistake she didn't make. A tear rolled down my cheek. Mom. The knot in my chest loosened slightly, not completely, but enough to breathe again. Dad believed she was innocent. That mattered. It mattered more than I could explain. Then I reached the next lines and everything changed. Again. The person responsible for Rachel's death isn't Sandra. It isn't anyone in our family. It's someone you know, someone you trust. Someone who attended Rachel's funeral, my wedding, your graduation, your mother's funeral. And my funeral. I froze. The room became silent, completely silent, because suddenly the suspect wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some forgotten figure from the past. It was someone woven into our lives, someone close, someone who had been there through everything. I looked at Walter. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to guess, because every possibility felt horrifying. Then I reached the final page, the final paragraph, the final words Dad ever wrote to me. Emily, if you're reading this, then you're stronger than I ever was. Find the truth. Meet your sister. Forgive yourself for things that were never your fault. And please remember one thing. Even when I failed you, even when I disappeared, even when I broke your heart, I loved you every single day. Love isn't always enough. I know that now, but it was always real, Dad. The tears came immediately. Hard, relentless, not graceful tears, not movie tears, ugly crying, the kind that steals your breath. The kind that bends you forward. The kind you've been holding back for years, because for the first time since his death, I finally heard what I had waited my entire life to hear. Not through assumptions, not through memories, not through hope. Through his own words, I loved you every single day. Walter quietly looked away, giving me space, giving me dignity. After several minutes, I wiped my eyes, then stared at the silver key, the safety deposit box, the answers, or at least more answers, then suddenly crash. Sound exploded from outside. Both of us jumped. The noise came from the porch, something breaking, glass, wood, something. Walter grabbed the flashlight. I grabbed the fireplace poker, probably not heroic, but it was all I had. Slowly, carefully, we moved toward the front door. My pulse hammered. The rain pounded the roof. The darkness outside seemed alive. Waiting, watching. Walter opened the door. The porch was empty. No person, no vehicle, nothing, just shattered glass. At our feet lay a broken brick. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper. My stomach dropped, because whoever threw it knew exactly where we were, and they wanted us to know they were watching. With shaking hands, I unfolded the note. 4 words were written across the page, 4 simple words: the witness is dead. And underneath those words was a recent photograph, a photograph of Claire. For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. The rain soaked the photograph in my trembling hands. Claire, the picture was recent, very recent, not years old, not something pulled from an old file. Recent. Someone had taken that photograph within the last few weeks, maybe days, maybe hours. A cold knot formed in my stomach, because suddenly this wasn't about the past anymore. Someone was watching Claire now, someone was following her, and someone wanted me to know it. Walter took the photograph from my hand. His face turned pale. That's not all. I looked closer. There was something written on the back, 3 words, find her first. My pulse exploded. The message felt less like a threat, more like a warning, a desperate warning, and somehow that scared me even more. Who sent this? Walter whispered. Neither of us had an answer. Because the brick made no sense. If someone wanted to scare us, why warn us? If someone wanted to help us, why stay hidden? Nothing fit together, nothing. I looked back toward the lake. Dark water stretched endlessly into the night. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid, not nervous. Not concerned, afraid, because somewhere out there people knew things, dangerous things, and they were moving faster than we were. We need to find Claire. Walter nodded immediately. Tonight, I agreed. No arguments, No hesitation. The safety deposit box would have to wait. Finding Claire came first, because if the photograph meant what I thought it meant, she might already be in trouble. We left the lake house before dawn. The storm followed us. Gray clouds covered the sky. The world looked exhausted. Honestly, so did I hadn't slept. My mind felt like a machine running too hot. Every clue, every secret, every revelation, all spinning endlessly. By sunrise, we were heading toward Ohio. According to Walter, Claire lived near a small town outside Cleveland. A quiet place. The kind of town where people waved from front porches. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody. Or at least they thought they did. The drive took hours, hours filled with questions. Questions neither of us could answer. Around noon, my phone vibrated, an unknown number. Again, my stomach tightened. I answered carefully. Hello, for several seconds silence. Then a woman's voice, soft, uncertain. Emily. My heart stopped. I knew that voice immediately. Even though I'd never heard it before, somehow I knew. Claire. The silence on the other end shattered. Then I heard her crying, not loudly, just quietly. The way people cry when they've been carrying fear alone for too long. Oh my God, my own voice broke. Claire. A laugh escaped her, half joy, half disbelief. We're finally talking. I started crying too, because after 35 years, after secrets, after lies, after lost opportunities, I was finally speaking to my sister, my sister. The words still felt unreal. For several moments, neither of us said much. We simply listened, breathing, laughing nervously, trying to process something impossible. Then Claire spoke, and immediately I knew something was wrong, very wrong. Emily, someone broke into my house. My chest tightened. When? 2 nights ago. I looked at Walter. His expression darkened. Claire continued. They didn't steal anything. That sounded familiar, too familiar. They searched. I swallowed. What were they looking for? Her answer came instantly. The files your father gave me. The blood drained from my face, the files, evidence, proof. Someone was hunting evidence, and apparently they believed Claire had it. Do you still have them? A pause, then no. My heart sank. Claire continued quickly, because I never kept them. What? I hid them. Relief hit so hard I nearly laughed. Claire wasn't naive, thank God. Where? Another pause, then not over the phone. Fair enough, very fair. The next thing she said sent another chill through me. They followed me yesterday. Walter immediately grabbed a notebook. Writing, listening, thinking, Claire continued. A black SUV. My pulse quickened. The same vehicle appeared 3 times. Not coincidence. Definitely not coincidence. Claire knew it too. You need to be careful. I know. Then her voice softened. And suddenly she sounded less like a witness, less like part of a mystery, more like a sister. I've wanted to meet you for years. Tears filled my eyes. Me too. It wasn't technically true. I hadn't known she existed, but somehow it felt true anyway, because now that I knew, it felt like there had always been a missing space in my life, a missing piece, and somehow that piece was her. Claire laughed quietly. You sound like Dad. The words hit unexpectedly hard. I laughed too, through tears. That's probably the first time anyone said that. Oh, trust me, she laughed. It's the sarcasm. For the first time in days, I genuinely smiled. A real smile, warm, human, not forced, not exhausted, just real. Then Claire's tone changed again, serious. Emily, what? There is something your father never told you. I froze. Of course there was. There was always something else. Another secret, another layer, another door. What is it? Claire took a slow breath, then answered. The witness your father found. My grip tightened on the phone. Was your mother. Everything stopped. The road, the car, my thoughts, everything. No, the word escaped automatically. Claire continued carefully. He discovered it 6 months before she died. I stared through the windshield, unable to process, unable to think. My mother wasn't just connected to the accident. Claire's voice cracked. She saw it happen. The world tilted. My mother, the woman Dad believed was innocent, the woman terrified for decades, the woman carrying secrets to her grave. She had witnessed Rachel's death, actually witnessed it. I felt physically ill. How? Claire answered quietly, because she was there. The silence afterward was deafening. I remembered every moment with Mom, every birthday, every hug, every holiday. And suddenly there was an entire life she never spoke about, an entire chapter hidden from me. Claire continued. Your father said she wasn't supposed to be there that night. I listened, barely breathing. She accidentally saw something. My chest tightened. What? Claire hesitated, then answered. The crash wasn't an accident. The words landed like thunder. No surprise anymore, not after everything. Yet hearing it confirmed changed everything. Rachel hadn't simply died. Someone caused it. Someone covered it up. Someone spent 23 years protecting that secret. Then Claire said something that made my blood run cold. "Your mother recognized the driver." I closed my eyes, my heart hammered, because suddenly I understood Mom's fear, not fear of guilt, fear of knowledge, fear of knowing exactly who was responsible. Then Claire spoke the final sentence, the sentence that changed the entire investigation, the sentence that made Walter nearly slam on the brakes. "The driver wasn't acting alone." I stared ahead, frozen. "What do you mean?" Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "There were two people in the vehicle." The highway seemed to disappear beneath us, because for 23 years everyone had searched for one culprit, one suspect, one killer, but according to the only witness, there had been two, and one of them was still close enough to attend every funeral, every wedding, every family gathering, watching, waiting, listening for decades. Then Claire whispered something else, a name, one single name, and the moment I heard it, I understood why my mother had spent 23 years terrified, because the person Claire named wasn't a stranger. It wasn't Sandra. It wasn't a forgotten acquaintance. It was someone I loved, someone I trusted, someone I had spoken to less than 2 weeks ago. And suddenly, for the first time, I wasn't sure who in my life was telling the truth anymore. For several seconds after Claire said the name, I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't even feel the seat beneath me. The world seemed to narrow into a single terrifying point. One name, one impossible name. My Aunt Rebecca, Mom's younger sister, the woman who helped raise me, the woman who brought soup whenever I was sick, the woman who sat beside me at Mom's funeral and cried harder than almost anyone, the woman who called every Sunday just to check on me. No, absolutely not. My first instinct was rejection, complete rejection. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Rebecca, sweet, gentle Rebecca, the woman who knitted blankets for premature Bobbies, the woman who cried during dog food commercials. There was no way, no possible way. "Claire," my voice sounded shaky. "There has to be a mistake." On the other end of the line, silence, not defensive silence, sad silence, the kind people use when they understand exactly why you're struggling. "I thought the same thing," Claire said softly. "I wanted it to be a mistake too." I gripped the phone tighter. Walter glanced at me nervously. Traffic rushed past outside, but inside the car, everything felt frozen. "Why would Dad think Aunt Rebecca was involved?" Claire hesitated, then answered. "Because your mother told him." The words struck hard, not because they proved anything, because they came from Mom. Mom wasn't someone who made reckless accusations. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't cruel. If she named someone, there had to be a reason she carried for decades. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, trying to think logically, trying not to fall apart. "What exactly did she tell him?" Claire answered carefully. "According to your father, your mother witnessed Rebecca arguing with Rachel hours before the crash." A knot formed in my stomach. Arguing? About what? Why? None of it made sense. Rebecca barely spoke about those years. In fact, a strange memory suddenly surfaced. Something small, something I hadn't thought about in decades. When I was 12, I found an old photograph in Mom's closet. The picture showed Mom, Dad, Aunt Rebecca, and another woman, a beautiful brunette I didn't recognize. I remember asking who she was. The room had gone strangely quiet. Mom took the photograph. Rebecca immediately changed the subject, and somehow the picture vanished afterward. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, my heart began racing. The woman in that photograph, could it have been Rachel? The possibility made my stomach twist. Claire continued. "Your father believed Rachel knew something." "Knew what?" "I don't know." The frustration nearly overwhelmed me. Every answer created more questions. Every clue opened another mystery. I rubbed my forehead, exhausted, emotionally drained, yet unable to stop because now we were too deep. There was no turning back, not anymore. Then Claire said something unexpected. "Emily." "Yeah. If Rebecca is innocent, we need to know." I blinked. The statement surprised me. Claire could have been angry, bitter, vindictive. Instead, she sounded fair, thoughtful, reasonable. She wanted the truth, not revenge. The realization made me like her immediately, maybe love her a little, because that's what sisters do sometimes. They arrive unexpectedly and somehow feel familiar. "We'll find out," I promised, no matter what. 3 hours later, we arrived at a small coffee shop outside Cleveland. The meeting place Claire chose. I spotted her immediately. and my heart nearly broke. Not from sadness, from recognition, because she looked like family, not identical, not even close, yet unmistakably family. The same eyes, the same smile, the same nervous habit of twisting a ring when anxious. A habit Dad had too. For a moment, neither of us moved. 35 years. 35 years of separate lives, different childhoods. Different memories, different struggles, yet somehow connected the entire time. Then Claire stood and smiled. And suddenly every awkward speech I had imagined disappeared. I walked toward her, she walked toward me, and we hugged, just hugged. No dramatic speeches, no perfect movie dialogue, just two sisters meeting for the first time and crying. A little, laughing, a little, holding on longer than strangers should, because we weren't strangers anymore. Not really. When we finally sat down, neither of us stopped smiling. It felt ridiculous, wonderful, overwhelming, like finding a missing chapter from your own life. Claire laughed first. I imagined this conversation 1,000 times. I smiled. How's it compare? She laughed harder. Honestly, less dramatic. That made both of us laugh. The tension eased, at least for a moment. Then reality returned. The files, the investigation, the secrets. Claire's expression became serious. I have something. She reached into her bag, not papers, not photographs, a flash drive. Small, ordinary, potentially life-changing. My father gave this to me 6 weeks before he died. Walter leaned forward immediately. What is on it? Claire swallowed. Everything. The word hung heavily in the air. Everything. Witness statements, financial records, evidence, secrets, maybe answers, maybe danger. Claire placed the drive on the table. Nobody touched it immediately. It felt almost sacred, like opening it would change reality itself. Eventually, Walter picked it up, carefully, very carefully, then he looked at Claire. Did anyone else know you had this? Her expression darkened. One person. My stomach dropped. Who? Claire hesitated, then answered. The day after Dad died, Sandra called me. Silence. Instant silence. My pulse quickened. Sandra again. Always Sandra somehow. What did she want? Claire laughed bitterly. At first she pretended to be friendly. That sounded familiar, too familiar. Then she started asking questions. Walter and I exchanged glances. What kind of questions? Claire's jaw tightened. Questions about whether your father left anything with me. Every alarm bell in my head began ringing. Sandra knew or suspected. Either way, she knew enough to ask. Claire continued. She specifically asked about files. The coffee shop suddenly felt much colder, because if Sandra knew about the files, maybe she knew more than she admitted, maybe much more. Then Claire reached into her bag again. This time she removed an envelope. Old, folded, worn, my pulse quickened immediately. What is that? Claire slid it toward me. I found it inside Dad's records. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. The moment I saw it, my blood turned to ice, because the picture showed Rachel, young, beautiful, alive, standing beside my mother, standing beside Aunt Rebecca, and standing beside another person, someone I recognized instantly. Someone who absolutely should not have been there. Someone who had spent years pretending not to know Rachel at all. Sandra, 23 years younger, smiling directly at the camera. The table went completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, because suddenly Sandra wasn't connected to the story through marriage. She wasn't an outsider who arrived later. She was there from the beginning, from the very beginning, and whatever happened the night Rachel died. Sandra had been much closer to it than anyone ever knew. Then Walter looked at the back of the photograph, his face drained of color. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, he handed it to me. Written in faded ink were 6 words, taken 2 days before Rachel died, and underneath that, a handwritten note in my father's unmistakable handwriting. This is where the lies began. Nobody spoke for a long time. The photograph sat in the middle of the table like a loaded weapon. Rachel, my mother, Aunt Rebecca, Sandra, 4 women standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling, laughing, looking like friends, not strangers, not distant acquaintances, friends, close friends. The image shattered years of assumptions, because Sandra had always claimed she never knew Rachel, not personally, not before meeting my father years later. That was the story, the official story. The story everyone accepted, including Dad, at least at first. Now the photograph told a different story, a very different story. Claire stared at the image. I've looked at this picture 100 times. I glanced up, and she swallowed. Every time I noticed something new. Walter adjusted his glasses. What? Claire pointed toward Rachel, specifically toward Rachel's left hand. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw it, a ring, a beautiful ring, small but unmistakable. My stomach tightened. An engagement ring, Claire nodded. That's what Dad thought. I looked at the date on the back, 2 days before Rachel died, 2 days. The realization hit hard. Dad had planned to propose, or maybe already had. Everything suddenly became even more tragic. A young couple, a baby on the way, a future ahead of them. Then disaster, then death, then decades of secrets. The weight of it settled heavily on my chest. Claire carefully opened her laptop. The flash drive sat beside it, waiting. None of us had touched it yet, not because we weren't curious, because we were terrified curiosity, the strongest kind. Eventually Walter spoke. We need answers. Nobody disagreed. Claire inserted the drive. For a moment nothing happened. Then folders appeared. Hundreds of files, documents, photos, audio recordings, scanned notes, years of investigation. Dad hadn't been casually researching. He'd been building a case. A real case. The first folder was labeled Rachel. The second, Susan, my mother. The third, SANDRA. The fourth, final evidence. The words made my pulse race. Dad had organized everything, prepared everything. Like a man who knew he might never finish, like a man leaving breadcrumbs behind. Claire opened the Sandra folder first. Immediately dozens of documents appeared. Phone records, bank statements, letters, photographs. The deeper we looked, the stranger things became. Sandra's name appeared everywhere. Not occasionally. Everywhere. My father wasn't imagining things. Sandra had been connected to Rachel long before she became my stepmother. Long before she entered my father's life. Long before any of us. Look at this. Walter pointed at a scanned newspaper clipping. 23 years old. A local charity fundraiser. The article included a group photograph. Rachel was there. So was Sandra, again, standing beside each other. Smiling, my chest tightened. Sandra lied repeatedly for years. The question was why. People don't maintain a lie for 23 years without a reason. A very good reason. Then Claire opened an audio file. A recording. Dad's voice filled the laptop speakers. The room instantly fell silent. Hearing him again felt surreal. Painful, comforting, heartbreaking all at once. Investigation log, May 14th. His voice sounded older, tired, determined. I confirmed Sandra knew Rachel far better than she admits. My pulse accelerated. Dad continued. Every time I uncover another connection, she denies it. A pause, paper shuffling, then people lie to hide guilt. Another pause, or fear. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly Dad felt present again, not a memory. Not a photograph, a voice, a real voice, still searching for truth even after death. Claire opened another file, then another, then another. Hours passed. Coffee turned cold, daylight faded, the investigation consumed us completely. Eventually we found something different, something unexpected. A video file recorded only 3 weeks before Dad's death. The title simply read, If Something Happens to Me. A knot formed in my stomach. Claire clicked play. Dad appeared on screen, older, thinner, more tired than I remembered, but unmistakably Dad. For a moment he just looked at the camera, like he was gathering courage. Then he smiled sadly. Hello! My eyes immediately filled with tears. He looked directly into the camera, directly into us. If you're watching this, things probably didn't go according to plan. A small laugh escaped him, a sad laugh, the kind people use when they already know how the story ends. He continued, I wanted to tell the truth myself. His voice cracked slightly. I wanted to fix everything. The room became silent. Nobody moved, nobody blinked. Dad looked exhausted, like a man carrying decades of regret. I made mistakes. He looked downward, then back up. Too many. Another pause. Then he spoke words that made my chest ache. I lost years with my daughter because I kept convincing myself there would be time later. Tears spilled down my face. Immediately, uncontrollably. Because he was talking about me, finally, honestly, without excuses, without distance, without pretending. I thought I was protecting people. He shook his head. No, a sad smile crossed his face. I was protecting myself. The honesty hurt, because it was true. Then Dad looked directly into the camera again. Emily, my breath caught. Hearing my name from him felt different, personal, real. If you're watching this, his voice cracked. I'm sorry. That was it, 2 words, simple words, yet somehow they shattered me. Years of disappointment, years of hurt, years of unanswered questions, and there he was, trying, too late, but trying. Claire quietly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. Neither of us spoke. Dad continued. There is one thing I need you to know. His expression changed, more serious, more urgent. The person responsible for Rachel's death isn't the person who planned it. The room froze, every nerve in my body awakened, because suddenly the entire story shifted. Again, Dad continued. The driver was only part of it. A cold wave swept through me. The driver, the one Mom recognized, not the mastermind, not the planner, just part of it. Then who was really responsible? Dad answered. The truth begins with money. Walter immediately sat forward, listening intensely. Dad continued. A lot of money. Bank fraud, insurance claims, hidden accounts. The pieces started clicking together. Rachel's death wasn't personal, not entirely. It wasn't jealousy, not revenge, not passion, money, the oldest motive in the world. Then Dad looked away briefly, almost as if deciding whether to continue. When he looked back, his eyes were filled with something I'd rarely seen in him. Fear, real fear. If you're watching this, there is a good chance I'm already dead. My stomach tightened. The room felt colder. Dad continued quietly. And if that's true, there's something you need to understand. A long pause, then. I don't believe my heart attack was natural. Nobody breathed. Nobody. The statement landed like an explosion. My father believed he was murdered. The words echoed endlessly inside my head. Murdered, not lost, not unlucky, murdered. Claire covered her mouth. Walter's face turned white. Dad continued. I can't prove it. His voice trembled. But 2 days before my collapse, someone broke into my office. My pulse hammered, another break-in, just like Walter's office, just like Claire's house, a pattern, a terrifying pattern. They were looking for evidence. Dad swallowed, then said the sentence that changed everything. The person behind this has spent 23 years erasing mistakes. The screen suddenly flickered. The video glitched. Audio distorted, then returned. For a brief second, another image flashed across the screen. A document, a photograph, something gone too quickly to identify. Walter immediately paused the video. Wait, he rewound, frame by frame, slowly, carefully. Then we saw it, and every ounce of air left my lungs. Because the image wasn't a financial document, it wasn't a bank record, it wasn't evidence, it was a family photograph, a recent one, taken less than 2 years ago. The picture showed Sandra, Aunt Rebecca, and someone standing between them. Someone none of us expected. Someone who supposedly died 11 years earlier. Someone whose grave I had personally visited. Rachel, alive, smiling, looking directly into the camera. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The image remained frozen on Claire's laptop screen. Rachel, alive, smiling, impossible, completely impossible. My mind rejected it instantly. This had to be a mistake, a glitch, a manipulated image, a coincidence. Someone who looked like Rachel. It had to be because Rachel was dead. Everyone knew that. There was a death certificate, a funeral, a grave. 23 years of history built around one undeniable fact. Rachel died. Yet the woman in the photograph looked exactly like her. Not similar, not close, exactly. Claire stared at the screen, pale, motionless. Walter adjusted his glasses and leaned closer, then closer still. Finally, he whispered, "Oh my God." I swallowed hard. "What?" His eyes never left the image. "I know where this picture was taken." The statement hit like a jolt. "What?" Walter pointed toward the background, a building, small, white, unremarkable, at least to me, but apparently not to him. "That's a rehabilitation center." The room went silent again. My pulse quickened. "A rehabilitation center," Walter nodded. "In Michigan." Claire frowned. "How do you know?" Walter looked disturbed. Because he already knew the answer. Because my wife stayed there after her stroke. Every nerve in my body seemed awake now, if Walter was right. Then the photograph wasn't random, it wasn't fake. It came from a real place, a place that existed, a place that could be verified. I looked back at the image, at Rachel or whoever she was, my hands trembled. "This can't be happening." Claire's voice cracked. "Tell me that's not my mother." Nobody answered because nobody could. The resemblance was undeniable. Then Walter zoomed in. Closer, closer, closer. The image became slightly blurry, but one detail remained clear. A scar, a small scar above the left eyebrow. Claire gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. I immediately knew why, because she had the same scar. A smaller version, inherited. A family trait. One Rachel supposedly passed to her daughter. Room tilted beneath me. For the first time, I considered something I never thought possible. What if Rachel never died? The thought felt absurd, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. Claire's eyes filled with tears. If she's alive, her voice broke. Then why didn't she come find me? Nobody had an answer, because that question hurt more than any mystery, more than any conspiracy, more than any investigation. A mother alive, yet absent. The possibility was devastating. Claire looked shattered. Not excited, not hopeful, heartbroken, because being abandoned hurts differently than loss. Loss has an ending. Abandonment creates endless questions. I reached across the table and took her hand. She squeezed mine tightly, the way sisters do, the way family does, the way we'd both needed for years. Then Walter suddenly sat upright, his eyes widened. What? He pointed toward the laptop. The date. I looked. The photograph metadata was still visible. The image had been taken 14 months ago. 14 months, not decades, not years before. 14 months. The room spun again because that meant Dad saw this. Dad knew, at least partially. He had proof, evidence, something, enough to include the image in his files. Then another realization hit, a much worse one. If Rachel was alive 14 months ago, then someone had faked a death, a massive lie. A lie maintained for 23 years. A lie involving hospitals, records, funerals, possibly law enforcement. Too many people, too many moving parts, too many opportunities for someone to talk, yet nobody did. How? Why? The questions felt endless. Then Claire noticed something else. A handwritten note attached to the image file. Dad's note. She opened it. 3 lines appeared, just 3, but they changed everything. Not Rachel, not exactly. Find Margaret Ellis. She knows the truth. Silence, confused silence. Because none of us knew who Margaret Ellis was, the name meant nothing, absolutely nothing. Walter immediately started searching through the folders, dozens of files, hundreds. Eventually he found one. A scanned driver's license. An elderly woman. Age 78, Margaret Ellis. My stomach tightened. There was more attached notes, investigation logs, meeting requests, letters. Dad had been trying to find her obsessively for years. Apparently Margaret was the nurse present the night Rachel died, or supposedly died. The nurse, the witness, the missing piece, the person who knew what actually happened. I leaned closer, then saw something that made my pulse jump, a recent address. Current, active, Margaret was alive, still alive, after all these years. Claire stared at the screen. You think she knows? Walter nodded slowly. I think she's the reason your father got close. The statement chilled me, because if Dad was close to the truth, and then died, what did that mean? None of us wanted to answer. Then my phone rang, again, unknown number, again. The sound made all 3 of us freeze. Nobody said a word. The phone continued ringing, once, twice, 3 times. Finally, I answered. Hello, silence. Then an elderly female voice, weak, shaking, terrified. Is this Emily Carter? My heart nearly stopped. Yes. The woman inhaled sharply, as though gathering courage. Then she spoke words that changed everything. My name is Margaret Ellis. Every hair on my arms stood up. Walter's eyes widened instantly. Claire nearly dropped her coffee. Margaret continued, her voice trembling. They found me. A knot formed in my stomach. Who found you? The answer came immediately. The people who buried Rachel. Nobody breathed, not one of us. Margaret continued. They know I've been talking. My pulse thundered. Margaret, where are you? Her breathing became uneven, panicked, desperate. They're coming. The words sounded small, broken, human. Then she whispered something else, something that froze the blood in my veins. Your mother tried to stop them. The room disappeared. Everything disappeared. Only those words remained. Your mother tried to stop them. Tears instantly filled my eyes. Mom, again, always Mom somehow. Not guilty, not hiding for herself, fighting, trying, protecting, for 23 years. Margaret continued, barely audible now. She saved a little girl. My chest tightened. A little girl, Claire, it had to be Claire. Then Margaret whispered, Your mother is the reason Claire survived. The words shattered the last remaining pieces of the story, because suddenly my mother wasn't just a witness, she wasn't just carrying secrets. She was a hero, a woman who spent decades protecting a child that wasn't even hers. Then the phone erupted with noise, a crash, a scream, a terrible scream. Margaret's scream, the sound ripped through the speaker, then silence, complete silence. The call disconnected. I stared at the phone, frozen, unable to move, unable to think. Walter was already standing, grabbing keys. Claire looked pale as a ghost because all 3 of us understood the same thing. Margaret had finally decided to tell the truth, and someone had reached her first. Then my phone vibrated one last time, a text message. No number, no name, just a photograph, a live photograph taken seconds earlier. Margaret sitting in her living room, looking directly at the camera, terrified. And standing behind her, watching her, was someone we all recognized instantly. Someone we trusted, someone we loved, someone who had been helping us the entire time. Walter Hayes. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. The photograph filled my phone's screen. Margaret sat in a worn armchair, terrified, and behind her stood Walter Hayes, the same Walter who had delivered Dad's letter, the same Walter who had driven with us, the same Walter who had helped us uncover every secret. Slowly, mechanically, I lifted my eyes. Walter was standing 3 feet away, holding his car keys, looking confused. Then he saw my face, and everything changed. What happened? His voice sounded genuine, too genuine. I showed him the photograph. The color drained from his face. Instantly, completely. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he whispered, "No!" A terrible silence followed. Claire stood up, slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. "Walter," her voice trembled. "Tell me why you're in this picture." Walter looked shattered, not angry, not defensive, shattered. And suddenly I knew not everything, but enough, because guilty people prepare lies. Walter looked like a man realizing his entire life was about to collapse. He sank into a chair, covered his face, and began crying, real crying. The kind that comes from someplace deep, someplace broken. "Oh God!" Nobody interrupted him. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, after nearly a minute, he looked up. His eyes were red, defeated, and old, very old. "I never wanted any of this." My heart pounded because those words weren't a denial, not really. Claire sat down slowly. "You need to explain." Walter nodded, then nodded again, as if accepting something inevitable. "The truth started 23 years ago." His voice barely rose above a whisper. And suddenly, every answer we'd been chasing finally arrived. 23 years earlier, Rachel never died in the crash, at least not immediately. The crash itself was real, but it wasn't accidental. Rachel had discovered a financial fraud scheme involving several local investors, millions of dollars, hidden accounts, insurance manipulation, fake companies. The people involved became desperate. When Rachel threatened to expose everything, someone tried to scare her. The confrontation became violent. The vehicle crashed. Rachel was critically injured. But alive, very much alive, the room felt frozen as Walter continued. "My brother was one of the men involved." The words landed heavily. "My younger brother, Thomas." I listened carefully, every piece finally beginning to fit. "Thomas Hayes, Walter Hayes, the same last name. How had I never noticed?" Walter continued. "Thomas wasn't supposed to hurt Rachel." His voice cracked. "It was supposed to be intimidation." A bitter laugh escaped him. The world's worst excuse. Nobody responded. Because there was nothing to say. No excuse mattered. Rachel's life was destroyed. Claire's childhood was stolen. Entire families shattered. Walter lowered his eyes. When Rachel survived, everything became a problem. The conspirators panicked. A living witness could destroy them, expose everything, send people to prison. Then came the decision that changed countless lives. Rachel disappeared, officially declared dead, unofficially hidden away, moved under a new identity, a new life, a new name, a prison disguised as protection. Claire covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, because suddenly her entire life made sense. And none of it was fair. Walter continued. The nurse was Margaret, the missing witness, the woman who knew everything, the woman who helped keep Rachel alive, the woman now in danger. Your mother found out. My chest tightened. Mom, always Mom, Walter nodded. Susan accidentally discovered the truth. A painful smile appeared on his face. She threatened to go public. That sounded exactly like Mom, brave, stubborn, unwilling to tolerate injustice, instead of helping cover it up. Walter paused. She protected Claire. Tears instantly filled my eyes. Mom, my wonderful mother, the woman I doubted for even a moment. She wasn't hiding guilt. She was carrying a burden, protecting a child, keeping Claire safe for decades. Walter continued. Your father eventually learned the truth too. Dad, the man who spent years chasing answers, the man everyone underestimated. He promised Susan he would protect Claire if anything happened. My throat tightened because despite all his failures, Dad had tried. He really had tried. Not perfectly, not bravely enough, but he tried. Walter sighed. Then came the final revelation, the one we'd been chasing all along. Sandra wasn't part of the original crime. The room went silent. What? Walter nodded. She discovered the truth years later. A chill ran through me. Sandra again, always Sandra. She realized your father was investigating. His expression darkened. And she wanted the money. Of course, money, the motive that had haunted the story from the beginning. Sandra learned about hidden accounts, missing funds, evidence, secrets, and she used them, manipulated them, profited from them. She wasn't the architect. But she was an opportunist. Walter looked exhausted, defeated, like a man finally dropping a burden he'd carried too long. Then Claire asked the question nobody wanted to ask. What about the photograph? Walter closed his eyes. Pain crossed his face. Because I visited Margaret. The answer was immediate, honest, raw. I was trying to convince her to come forward. Nobody spoke. Walter continued. The photo was taken without my knowledge. He swallowed hard. I wasn't threatening her. His voice cracked. I was begging her. The room fell silent, and for the first time, I believed him. Not because I wanted to, because I could see it in his face, in his voice, in the grief he'd carried. Walter wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the villain either. He was a man who spent 23 years cleaning up damage caused by his brother. A man trying desperately to make things right. Too late, but trying. 3 weeks later, federal investigators arrested several people connected to the old fraud scheme, including Sandra. The evidence from Dad's safety deposit box changed everything. Financial records, hidden transfers, witness statements, proof, real proof. The lies finally collapsed. One by one, like dominoes, Margaret survived, shaken, terrified, but alive. And for the first time in decades, she told the entire truth. Publicly, completely. The story made national headlines. People were shocked. Outraged, heartbroken. 23 years of deception exposed. 23 years of stolen lives. Then came the moment none of us thought would ever happen. Rachel agreed to meet Claire. The meeting took place on a quiet spring afternoon. No cameras, no reporters, no audience, just a mother and a daughter. I sat outside beneath a large oak tree, waiting, giving them privacy, giving them space. The conversation lasted nearly 4 hours. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they simply sat together, holding hands, making up for lost time, not all of it. Nobody can recover 23 stolen years, but enough to begin. When Claire finally emerged, tears covered her face. Yet she was smiling, actually smiling, the kind of smile that comes from healing, the kind of smile that comes after carrying pain for far too long. She walked directly toward me, then hugged me tightly. She's amazing, I laughed through tears. I believe it. And for the first time in my life, my family felt larger instead of smaller. Broken, complicated, messy, but larger. 6 months later, I visited Mom's grave. Alone, the autumn air was cool, leaves drifted across the cemetery. I sat beside her headstone, holding fresh flowers. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I smiled, because for years I thought my mother died carrying secrets. Now I understood something different. She died carrying courage, a different thing entirely. I know the truth now, I whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees, and somehow I felt her there, not literally, just present. In memory, in love, in everything she left behind. Then I laughed quietly, because I could already hear her response. Something practical, something loving, something very Mom. I placed the flowers beside her grave, then stood, ready to leave, ready to move forward, finally at peace. As I turned away, my phone buzzed, a text message from Claire, a family photo. Rachel, Claire, me standing together beside a lake, smiling, looking ridiculous, looking happy. Under the photo, Claire had written, "Dad would have loved this." I stared at the screen, then laughed. Then cried, then laughed again, because she was right. For all his mistakes, for all his failures, for all the years he lost, he would have loved this. And maybe that was enough, maybe not a perfect ending, but a real one. The kind life actually gives us, messy, painful, beautiful, and worth fighting for. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me about the door that opened for you. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.